Sleep with her. The leader of the cult group shouted at Tunde to sleep with his mother. He began to remove his boxer. His father, Mr. Ademola, looked on. Mrs. BC lay there helplessly as her own son ready to sleep with her. She could hear everything, but the drugs did not allow her to react in any way. Tears began to stream down her cheeks. As Tunde committed the evil with his own mother, the cult group continued with their ritual. As Tunde entered his mother's room, he pulled out his trouser and dropped his marijuana. His mother begged him to stop and reminded him she is her mother, but Tunde didn't listen. He overpowered his mother despite her plea and pinned her down. Tunde said he had no option and believed his mother will understand. Tunde said he is sleeping with his own mother to protect the family's legacy. You will be the judge after watching the video and tell me if Tunde's mother deserves it. In Lagos, there are many rich people's groups. Some are for the purpose of connection, so they would have their class of men bringing them enough money when they have an occasion. Some are simply ritualists. And this is what the Brotherhood family stands for. It is a group that Mr. Ademola belongs to. Everyone knew Mr. Ademola, the rich. He was very popular. He was so popular that he had a say in who wins an election. This is because of his monetary influence, as people tend to give attention to who has enough money to spend, and Mr. Ademola has spent a lot of it. One thing about Mr. Ademola is that his source of wealth is a mystery. His wife, BC, married him even when she knew that his source of wealth was questionable. She never wanted to think about where her husband got his money from. She'd never question him. Despite being a Yoruba man, Ademola has a mind of his own. He ignored a Yoruba saying that, "A house built on blood will crumble in shame." Mr. Ademola ignored this wisdom. The couple was blessed with 3 children. One day, there was a party at Mr. Ademola's house. Partying in his house is a constant occurrence. He titled the celebration of life even when it wasn't his birthday. Just like that, a lot of people attended. His Brotherhood family came. They were about 10 in number. They entered the compound with a convoy. All of them put on white kaftans and red caps. They held a staff whose head was carved like a python's head. It is in moments like this that Mrs. BC will start showing off. Some of her friends were in attendance, and because she was the one among them that had the richest husband, she always spoke with a sense of arrogance. "See them, see my husband's friends now. Money is good, whoever says money is not good is a sadist." Her friends, who always try to make her feel important so they can stay in her circle, always fan her ego. Mrs. Katumi was the first to speak. "My friend, you can say that again. Your husband is a real man. The number one that we all know. Please, whoever says money is not good should be slapped on the lips." She laughed while the other women joined her laughter. Despite her sense of importance, Mrs. BC did not go to where the Brotherhood is seated. They were usually highly respected. Her husband sat with them. The important part of the occasion eventually reached, which was the spraying of money. It was then that Mrs. BC went to dance with her husband. The Brotherhood began to spray them money. They were spraying different currencies, dollars, pounds, euros, and naira. There was money everywhere, and some of them were even flying in the air. Some guests will quickly pick up any money that lies close to them. After that big occasion that has no real definition, some young ladies were brought in a car. Mrs. BC always sees young ladies, about 2 to 3, being brought into their mansion. She never asked what they came to do, and she had never seen them leave. That particular day, the Brotherhood followed those ladies to the sacred room that Mrs. BC had never been in since her 15 years of marriage to her husband. As she followed the girls with her eyes into the room, her husband looked at her, narrowing his eyes to warn her against looking. Mrs. BC quickly went into her own room. In her room, she brought out her phone to check through things she can order on Instagram. She began to order gold jewelry, shoes, and bags. She ordered these things despite having so much of them already. Meanwhile, in the secret room, a great sin was being committed against humanity. The girls that were brought, who had simply been lured by money by the Brotherhood members with promises of being taken to Dubai for a holiday, were actually meant for the renewal of Mr. Ademola's money ritual. This was who they were. They were all ritualists. The party was simply a celebration of his 20 years in the demonic society, and now he had brought in girls to renew his contract with the devil. The girls, before they knew what was happening, were quickly touched with charm, making them numb. They looked on without any strength to react as one of the Brotherhood members drove a dagger into one's neck, collected her blood in a cup, and poured it on the carved deity that was sitting at a corner of the room. He repeated this for the other girl too. When it was all done, the Brotherhood members began to sing a celebration song. "Congratulations to us," each of them said to Mr. Ademola as they shook his hand. As they left, they took the girl's body to be disposed of, but Mr. Femi stayed behind. Mr. Femi was the one that introduced Mr. Ademola to the Brotherhood Society. They had been friends for long. The duo went to the house bar to sit and to have a chat. "Congratulations once again, my friend," Mr. Femi said. "Thank you, but you know, sometimes I just do not see the need for the level of atrocities I have committed," Mr. Ademola said. "What do you mean?" Mr. Femi asked, sipping his drink and adjusting himself on his seat. "I have killed innocent people. I will be dead in the next 10 years, and I will be putting my family into serious crisis when I do. So I really wonder if it's worth it," Mr. Ademola said. "Well, my friend, you just have to remember you did this because of the level of poverty that you were in. In as much as there is money now, then you should have no regrets," Mr. Femi said. "I should have no regret even when I will be dead in the next 10 years?" Mr. Ademola asked. Mr. Femi took a little while before finally responding. "I understand you, Ademola. I have thought of it too once or twice. But it is a price we must pay for all we enjoy. I feel pity for that woman, my wife. She does not even know what is ahead of her, that her own child will have to sleep with her when I'm dead. She's only enjoying money," Mr. Ademola said. "Well, that shouldn't bother you. After all, when you're dead, you will have nothing to worry about. You have done your best to secure the bag for them. It will now be up to them if they want to keep the bag or not. After all, are most of our wives not pretending that they don't know our hands are not clean? Or does she think you harvest the money?" The two friends chat on and on. At the end of the day, Mr. Femi was able to convince Mr. Ademola to cheer up. 3 months after the renewal of his sacrifice, Mr. Ademola was called by his local authority to support his project, borehole drilling across the local government. Mr. Ademola was invited by him to his office. "Distinguished sir, we have seen you do it in the past, and we know your love for your community will make you do it again. Please, taking this up will help my office to focus on other things, making community development easier and faster." Mr. Ademola, who had been sitting down and hearing him speak, cleared his throat. "I like people that pay respect. When I paid for your office through endorsement and financial support, you did not go about badmouthing me like your predecessor did. No, I will never do a thing like that." The chairman quickly defended. "Yes, you have never done that, and it is why I will be helping you to do this project, but in my name. That is not a problem, distinguished. We will definitely do it in your name." Mr. Ademola stood abruptly. "See you next time, my friend. Thank you so much for honoring us with your presence," the chairman said. His head still bent as Mr. Ademola left. Truly, Mr. Ademola drilled 10 boreholes. He had his face plastered all over them. Everyone sang his praises. During the commissioning of the project, the state government was in attendance. In his speech, he said, "Distinguished aide is a friend of this government. We know what he has done, and we will not disappoint in showing our appreciation. We will not be ungrateful. The people of Aworo local government, you have a government, but you have distinguished Ademola too, so I do not see you people lacking anything. Once again, we thank our benefactor, the Aworo local government, for calling our philanthropists' attention to this project and our people for letting us rule them. Just like our mantra, we will not fail you." Everyone clapped, and the governor commissioned the projects, using one of them as a reference to others. He cut the ribbon. The next day, 2 women came to fetch water from the borehole. One suddenly began to sing. She recounted how she had always had to go to the stream before now and how this had changed the dynamic of things for her. She sang and danced. Aya Ola, it is enough. Why are you dancing like this as if you have never seen a borehole before? You know I have seen a borehole before, but isn't it obvious that we wouldn't have seen one in our vicinity if not for Chief Ademola? It is well, since you all in this community decided to welcome calamity into our midst and act as if you don't know that Mr. Ademola is a ritualist. Do not cry when you become directly affected by his wickedness. NN, don't you dare talk to me like that. You know he is a ritualist, yet you are here to benefit from his project. Why not drink your gossip? The other woman did not reply to this. It is true that she does not like that Ademola has so much relevance when the money he has is questionable. At the end, she said, well, at least I am not praising him like I don't have any conscience. The other woman hissed and left. Mr. Femi also had to renew his ritual. He got some boys who were ready to do the deal of bringing him humans to use. These boys do not look like the type of work they do. One of them, Ajigu, is a very loving man to his wife and children. To them, he is a songwriter who gets good gigs, especially when he writes for big musicians, but to the Brotherhood Society, he is a body part supplier. It was Ajigu he contacted when it was time to get people for his ritual. Like always, the Brotherhood Society gathered in his large compound, celebrating what has no name except to them. Afterwards, Ajigu dragged in 2 girls through the back door at night, and again, they killed and used them to renew their ritual. Ajigu is still the one who usually disposes of their bodies once their blood has been used. He was going to dispose of the body when a driver that was driving behind him noticed that blood was trailing down his bonnet. He felt in him that something was wrong, so he quickly called the police and registered his complaint. In no time, the police arrived. They nabbed Ajigu and collected 2 lifeless bodies from his car trunk. The discovery shocked the police division. They beat Ajigu and took him into custody. By morning, news of his atrocities was all over news outlets. It was Mr. Femi who watched it on the morning news. He panicked and quickly called Mr. Ademola. Have you seen what I just saw on the news? What is that? Ajigu has been caught with the 2 bodies he was meant to dispose of. I hope this boy will not start running his mouth when tortured. Ah, that's a serious case, but I'm sure he knows better. And I know we have to get him out as soon as possible. Exactly. Even a strong man like Ajigu will start to vomit secrets when this evil police that we have these days tortures him. Please, start making calls. I trust what your connection can do. Truly, Mr. Ademola began to call. He called the local government chairman. My boy, how are you? I am fine, distinguished. To what do I owe this honor? I want you to put your DPO in order. I have an interest in the case of one Ajigu that was arrested in connection with human bodies. Oh, the chairman said, and it was later that he added, okay, sir. Mr. Ademola didn't stop there because he knew the matter was gaining public interest, and whatever he must do it fast. So he called the governor of the state. The governor was also very responsive, but unlike the chairman, he was not surprised when he heard Mr. Ademola's request. Instead, he added, if you don't have trusted people to handle your job properly for you, then I can link you with a group that does a clean job. Thank you, my friend. I look forward to your swift intervention. Just like that, Ajigu was released. The news outlets began to say something different because they were getting a different report from the police now, something like, we didn't actually arrest him with the bodies. He called the police's attention to an accident, and since he was the only one there, we assumed he did it, but further investigation vindicated him. The police spokesperson said. Just like that, Ajigu was released. Meanwhile, his family was already facing the wrath of the community. People have stopped talking to his wife and pointing fingers at her and her children. They have not been going out, even his children had stopped going to school because of the shame of what their father did. One evening, Ajigu's wife decided to go and get food at a nearby store. The woman selling the foods began to run when she sighted her. Ah, it is the wife of a killer. "What do you want from me?" Because her children were really hungry and she could not afford to go to the market due to shame, she didn't leave the stall immediately. "Please, Ma. I just want to get some food. My children are hungry." "Ah, is it not better you allow them to die of hunger than watch them grow into a killer like their father? Or are you planning to make a community of killers? You want to kill all of us through your family?" Ajagu's wife had to leave at this juncture. People looked at her with disdain. One woman who had wanted to know why a woman would decide to marry a killer walked up to her and walked with her. "Thank you, Ma," Ajagu's wife said. She felt this would help her to divert concentration from the glaring eyes surrounding her. "You are welcome, but why did you decide to marry a man like that? You knew he was not into any business, but you were busy enjoying his money. With this, you can't really say you don't know he does hideous business." Ajagu's wife began to cry. She began to cry and even started wailing, to the horror of everyone and the woman that had asked the question. "I never knew he kills. All I knew was that he is a successful songwriter. I was given in marriage to him because he is a responsible man and well-doing. We found some of his interactions with singers, and they paid him. My family investigated him before marrying me off. This is not our fault." That was the day the woman and her children packed out of the house that was built for them. She took all the money she could find and properties she could sell and left for another state to start another life. A day after Mr. Ademola made the calls, Ajagu was released. His body showed that the police did not play with him upon his release. "I trusted you would seal your lips. I heard they tried all they could to make you mention names," Mr. Femi said. "Honestly, they did." He replied not just to Mr. Femi but to the whole Brotherhood family gathered in Mr. Femi's house. "But I knew you would come for me. I am grateful, my lords," he said, bending his head. "We are in the mood of celebrating you," Mr. Ademola said and called someone to bring him a wine. Ajagu drank the wine and realized instantly that he had been poisoned. He could not speak but held his belly that was tormenting him badly. The Brotherhood members continued drinking and eating until Mr. Femi said, "We like business associates that do not bring us trouble. That is why we have been able to work with you for so long, but now your identity has been exposed. You are of no value to us again." He called the two men in suits who had been standing close. They quickly carried Ajagu in. They will be using him too for ritual. As the years passed, so did the age. Mr. Ade agreed with his spiritual leader that he would submit his own life to society. It was supposed to be his 60th birthday. Despite the sadness this brought him, he would smile when he saw his children, who would be living in luxury after his departure. He hoped they would have the mind to give the spiritual leader the sacrifices he requires. Mr. Ademola's 3 children, Tunde, Io, and Felicia, have really been spoiled with richness. They attend parties every day and host most of it at home. They have many girlfriends and spend money lavishly. It was during one of the parties that they were hosting in the house that Mr. Ademola called his eldest son, Tunde, "Come here." He went to meet his father at his private parlor. He discarded his marijuana smoke as he went in. "Son, I have something very important to tell you, and you have to listen to all I have to say." "Okay, father." Tunde listened keenly. Tunde loved his mother and had always respected and protected her, but when Mr. Ademola called his first son into his inner chamber, he told him the greatest secret that would change his life forever. "I am an occultist." Tunde jumped up. "Yes, I am, but sit down, that is not all. I use humans for the renewal of my offerings to the gods. I had used my life as the utmost sacrifice, so I use other people's lives to renew. Now it is finally time to give it up." "Daddy," Tunde whispered. Too scared to talk. He was shivering. "You must put yourself together so you will hear what your role is in all of this." "No, Daddy. I have no role in all of this. I don't have an idea what you have gotten yourself into, so kindly let me out of your plans." Mr. Ademola began to laugh, surprising Tunde, who is now really scared. "If you like the life you have, then I advise you to stop acting like a child. Did you ask where the money was coming from when you were busy squandering it? Let me tell you, boy. If you do not sit down and hear what I have to say, you will go really poor. So poor when I'm dead that you will not be able to buy a cup of Gary and biscuit. Do you even understand the level of poverty I've just described? It means even the beggars in the street will be richer than you. Hearing this, Tunde sat down. What do you mean by you used your life as the utmost sacrifice? I will die the day I celebrate my 61st birthday. That's the oath I took. You will have to take over. So, I will have to die when I'm your age in order to stay rich too. No, son. I have made the utmost sacrifice with my life. You will have to sleep with your mother every day to stay rich. Daddy, Tunde sprang up. That's a cruel sacrifice. Well, I am not forcing you, Tunde. I will be dead in 2 years' time, and the choice will be totally yours to make. That night, Tunde could not sleep. He asked the 3 girls he had booked to keep him company all night to stay in their house and not come. He does not want to live poor, but the sacrifice seems unfair to him. The next day, he told his father that he would do it. Together, they went to Mrs. Beese's room. She was so surprised to see her husband in her room. She could count the number of times he had come to her room since their 28 years of marriage. Chief, Tunde. Hope no problem. Sit down, Mr. Ademola said as the 2 men had their seats too. Mr. Ademola told his wife for the first time that he's an occultist. He began to shout and cry. Don't provoke me, Ademola said. Tunde might be able to feign ignorance, and I will let it be, but not you. You've always known but pretended you didn't. Or where do you think all the money comes from? I didn't know, Chief. I didn't know, and why are you telling me now? Mr. Ademola told her he will be dying soon and that their son must sleep with her if they still want to be rich. Beese might be greedy, but this was where she drew the line. You can't be serious, Ademola. Everyone was shocked. It was the first time she was calling her husband by his name. Over my dead body will I allow the son I gave birth to sleep with me? Well, the decision is not entirely yours to make. Mr. Ademola said. Really? Whose is it then? Her eyes landed on her son. Tunde, will you really have the heart to sleep with your mother? Do you have the heart? Tunde looked away. Beese held her head. Ah, my son, you will sleep with me to stay rich. Mummy, I am not the devil here. You knew who Daddy was, yet you married him and brought me into this life of luxury, so you can't blame me if I want to sustain it. Mrs. Beese began to cry. She made it clear that she would never allow it. The first ritual of mother and son sex ought to be done before Mr. Ademola passes, so they tried to persuade her to agree, but Mrs. Beese refused. She was surprised at how the love of money can make people go mad. I refuse, she said and left. 1 year to Mr. Ademola's birthday, they finally decided that it was time for the sacrifice to be done. They added some substance into Mrs. Beese's drink such that she was unaware of what was happening to her but not in control of her body. They brought her to Mr. Ademola's secret room and stripped her naked. His son was on boxers too. This sacrifice was fully participated in by all the Brotherhood members. To them, it was just another day, doing what they were now used to. They all began to do the ritual as Tunde was instructed to sleep with his mother. Sleep with her. The leader of the cult group shouted at Tunde to sleep with his mother. He began to remove his boxer. His father, Mr. Ademola, looked on. Mrs. Beese lay there helplessly as her own son ready to sleep with her. She could hear everything, but the drugs did not allow her to react in any way. Tears began to stream down her cheeks. As Tunde committed the evil with his own mother, the cult group continued with their ritual. When Tunde finished up, he rose to his feet, leaving his mother on the floor, still naked. The leader began to talk. With this ritual, you have become a member of the cult. Your father's ritual has been renewed through you, and you will become a custodian of his commitment to this sacred cult. Mrs. Beese was then returned to her room, tears still streaming down her cheek, but no one really cared except for Tunde, who felt really bad. He felt so bad that he could almost feel the physical pain crawling through his body. Still, he waited till the end of the ritual. Mrs. BC eventually succumbed to sleep because of the drugs and the pain. Before she woke up, Mr. Ademola and Tunde had already locked the door to her room, so when she woke up, she knocked and knocked but couldn't get anyone to attend to her. Prior to now, Mr. Ademola, knowing the kind of thing he wanted to do, had already sent his remaining 2 children to go on vacation. They were really happy when they were told they would be traveling for a 1-month holiday. It was later in the morning that Tunde took food to his mother. He carefully opened the door and went in. He refused to look at his mother's face when he dropped the food. With a trembling voice, his mother called him. "Tunde, what have you done? Don't you have any conscience? I birthed you. I am your mother. How could you sleep with the woman that gave birth to you? The one that breastfed you for 2 years? Whatever reason you think you have, I am kind enough to tell you it is still very stupid." Tunde decided to sit and talk with his mother. He sat such that he turned his back to her. "I have very little choice, mother. Daddy said we would become very poor if I didn't do it. You helped Daddy to mess our lives up. With what he said, I can't even succeed on my own if I don't do this. It is like my destiny is tied to his ritual. I am useless without it. You knew his hands were not clean when you married him, and now, you think I'm the only one to be blamed?" Tunde said. Though she had little energy to be upset, Mrs. BC still spoke. "So, you are going to blame me for marrying someone whom we all think was a philanthropist that just didn't want to have his source of wealth known? My family would have disowned me if I refused to marry your father. I only started suspecting him when we were married. Still, I cannot leave because it will be a shame that I left a big man to start hustling all over again. So, Mummy, we were all scared of being poor again after experiencing wealth. You cannot blame me for feeling the same thing with you. You dare not try to compare your evil with my fear. Don't you realize what you have done? You disrupted the sanctity of life itself. I never thought I would ever say this to any of my children, but I regret the day I gave birth to you. You are an epitome of disappointment." With this, Mrs. BC faced the other side, no longer looking at her son. "I suppose now that you have done what you've been told, I will be allowed to leave your wealth. For I have never hated money as much as you have made me hate it now." Calmly, Tunde said to his mother, "You can't leave. You are the link to me and the wealth. What we did yesterday has to be constant to make the sacrifice work. My father was using human blood. This is all we have to do." With the last strength in her, Mrs. BC started talking again. "People's blood? What kind of a man did I marry? What kind of a man is this? You people were killing other people's children for money, and now my soul must be sacrificed too? Father said you knew he was a ritualist." Tunde said. "You and your father are mad. You people are stupid for trying to force me to be a part of this evil. You are stupid, Tunde, and I will not be a part of this." With this, Tunde finally left. He went to his father's room. Mr. Ademola was already on the verge of transitioning to the other world. His left leg had begun to rot. It smells really bad, and he was in pain. "Father, my mother does not seem like she will ever compromise." Mr. Ademola grunted. "Well, she didn't, but we did it the last time. You must come to terms with the fact that she may always refuse, so mark out your plans and do what you have to do." "You mean I should be prepared to always rape her?" He was dumbfounded. "I told you to do what you have to do." With this, Tunde left the room. Unsure of what the future holds. Mr. Ademola died 2 months after this discussion with his son. At his death, the Brotherhood ritualist came. They locked his body in the secret room, and they performed a lot of rituals. They danced and sang, and Tunde was made to do so many things as a form of taking over from his father. Sometimes they will cry, sometimes they will laugh. It took them hours before they finally rested the corpse, before other people were allowed to see it. The burial occasion was nothing like the city had ever seen. Hundreds of cows were killed, musicians were called to sing, and different undertakers were invited to carry the coffin and perform with it. Though Mr. Ademola died on his 60th birthday, it was almost like he died when he was 100 because of how the party went. People were fighting for meat and rice. There were very few people who actually shed tears, and these tears were for selfish reasons. As they proceeded, the king of the community came too to mourn with the people. Of course, all the dignitaries present were recognized. People were called to talk about all they knew of him, and they gave really amazing speeches. They talked about how he was a gift to humanity and how they could not be thankful enough to God for him. All this while, Mrs. BC was in one of the canopies with a host of family members and friends. Her children were also seated in a canopy with their friends surrounding them. The firstborn, Tunde, was the one doing the greetings and ushering in of people to sign the funeral register. He sat in a way that he was looking directly at his mother. His mother refused to look away. He was wearing a white kaftan and a red cap, just like the other members of the Brotherhood cult. Unlike the other people present, Mrs. BC knows now what was happening, and instead of mourning the passing of her husband, what she felt for him was disgust. So when mourners struggled to come close, to make her see they were there, she felt disturbed by their gesture. His other children were there, crying, still oblivious of the evil around them. Later, Tunde, his mother, Io, and Felicia went into their parlor after they were left alone. There, Tunde began to address the family. As the leader of this household, I must set things right for our family. Io, Felicia, I will bring out some money to set you people up. So you can start having your space and begin to think of how to have your family. I and my mother will remain in this house so we can take care of it so I can set up my own family here too. Io began to laugh when he stopped talking. Of course, the reason Tunde was saying all this was because he wanted everyone to leave so he could do whatever he wanted to do with their mother without her having any help. But Io found his talk really funny. Tunde, you are so funny. When did our father die that you are already dressing like him and acting like you are now our father? How many years did you even senior me with? 3? And you're giving orders? Tunde did not say anything. Felicia sat with her mother and rested her head on her shoulder. Brother Tunde, I do not like that you are bringing this thing up the very day our father died. Were you waiting to take up his duty? We are still mourning, for crying out loud. Their mother knew all of Tunde's intentions. She knew this was so he could do whatever he liked. Tunde, you have heard your siblings. This is not the time to say all of this. Will you keep quiet and let me talk? Tunde shut his mother up, surprising her and his siblings. His mother's mind quickly went to the fact that this could be because he had started to sleep with her. That he no longer see her as his son but as an equal human. With this, Mrs. BC began to cry. This angered her other children. Io charged at his brother. Trying to fight him, Mrs. BC had to quickly intervene. She could not bear to see Io getting hurt. At the end of the day, the family dispersed to other areas of the apartment, leaving Mrs. BC and her daughter still seated at the parlor. Felicia cried subtly for the death of her father and the chaos around her family, while Mrs. BC cried for the things she could not tell her other children. Later that night, Mrs. BC slept on the same bed with her daughter. She wanted to use her as a cover to prevent Tunde from having access to her. The consistent sex with his mother must commence a week after his father's burial, so Tunde was worried that his mother was using his sister as a shield, so one day when his mother was alone, Tunde quickly went to her. Mother, I understand that you are trying to use BC to protect yourself from doing what you should, but I must tell you, you run the risk of getting exposed if you continue. What do you mean getting exposed, Tunde? You are the one who is scared of being exposed. Mrs. BC said tiredly. Tunde gave a wicked laugh. I have a recording of having sex with you. What do you think your other children will think of you when they see that video? What do you think the society will say? The shame will definitely be on you. Mrs. BC was stunned. She sprung up and began to hit Tunde. You wicked ritualist, how dare you? Tunde pulled her away from him and left the room, leaving Mrs. BC to decide whether she was ready to be judged by the public or to continue letting her son cause her pain. Between these choices, there was no one she was ready to make. But she was too scared to dare Tunde, so she told her daughter to start sleeping in her own room, thinking persuasion would work on her son. One of the things that the Brotherhood Society enjoyed doing was stringing parties, so a week after his father's burial, Tunde attended one of their members' parties. A celebration of life. That happened to be the first time he experienced how the society members casually kill humans for their sacrifice. Before his eyes, the celebrant slit a girl's throat, collected the blood, and took a gulp out of it, and the society members cheered. Tunde was too stunned to cheer. Everything was dull and new to him, and he did not understand why these people were so mean, but then he quickly remembered he was now one of them and that he had done something wicked to his own mother too. Again, the Brotherhood Society welcomed him to their midst. He returned home that day feeling light from his experience, thinking how he would have to sleep with his own mother that night on top of all that he had witnessed that day. Before he got home, he went to a joint and got packs of marijuana. He then went straight to his mother's room. "What is wrong with you?" His mother managed to ask because of the look on his face. "Mother, today I saw something really horrible. I saw one of the cultists slit a girl's throat and drank from her blood," he said, his head bent as he Saturday. "Maybe you now see what I am saying? Nothing good can come out of this. You can still turn your back. You don't have to do this. We will manage." Tunde laughed. "Well, that is why I have to do this. If we can keep up with this, then I won't have to kill to keep my father's wealth." "So, you think this is not evil enough?" his mother asked, disappointed. "Not as much as killing many people." Tunde lit his weed and began to smoke, still in his mother's room. "If you are that sure you are a saint and this is not a sin, why do you have to get high to pull through it?" Tunde paused for a while and continued to smoke. "Well, because of you, mother, I do not want to see you as my mom when I'm doing what I have to do. But I am your mother." "Stop, stop," Tunde said, covering his ears and standing up. When he looked at his mother now, his eyes were really red. "Now pull off your clothes." "What?" Mrs. BC began to shake when she realized her words had no much effect. "Please, Tunde, don't do this. Pull your clothes. You think I wanted this? Pull your clothes." Mrs. BC refused. Yes, refuse. "I will then send the video to a media house. Let the whole world see that the famous Mrs. BC sleeps with her own son." Without waiting for him to speak, Tunde jumped on her and used a wrapper to tie her mouth. Mrs. BC tried to pull it away, but he quickly brought a rope from his pocket and tied her mother to a bed. Mrs. BC wanted to kill him that minute. He had wanted to before now but felt he was still her son. However, right now, he does not feel anything for him, just hatred and an intent to kill him right there. Tunde finished up after 10 minutes. 10 minutes was all it took to make his mother a shadow of herself again. To make her crave death. Tunde pulled away from her and untied her hands and legs. Mrs. BC pulled a duvet over her body and looked away, too ashamed to say a thing, too ashamed to look at her son now. She could not even find the stitch to remove the fold from her mouth. Tunde left her room afterwards, running his hand through his hair, and left for his own room. Mrs. BC did not sleep that night. She cried throughout the night. The next morning, Felicia quickly came into her mother's room to know how she was doing and found her in a mess. "Mother, what happened to you?" Her mother wanted so much to tell her or to tell someone at least, but she did not know how to start. Her lips could not find the words to use to explain. How does she tell her daughter that her brother raped her? She asked herself and kept mute. Her daughter just knew all was not well with her mother, but she refused to tell her what the problem was. That morning, she rushed out and began shouting her brother's name. The two of them were later called by the help to come and meet their sister. As the rooms were so far apart, it was almost like they were in different buildings because of how large the houses are. "Why are you disturbing me this morning?" Tunde said immediately he sighted his sister. Io did not say anything. He just went to his sister and pulled her close as she was seated on one of the couches in the parlor. "Tunde, why have you become so cold? Why is anger your first response to calling you to come out? Don't you see my face that I am not happy? What is wrong with you?" Felicia asked. Felicia, you better watch your mouth. I am no longer just your brother but now in a position of a father to you, to this household. Felicia scoffed at this. Io was upset with his brother. Tunde, really, what is your problem with this forced position you have given yourself? Whose father are you that you are now so out of reach? Tunde eventually sat too, allowing Felicia to finally talk. Mother is not fine. Felicia burst into tears as she said this. What do you mean mother is not fine? Io asked, still holding her close. I saw her this morning, and she was a mess. This does not seem to be connected to Daddy's death. Something is terribly wrong. I believe it is just your girly instinct. Mother is perfectly okay, Tunde said, trying to dismiss the case. The siblings, except Tunde, went to their mother's room. By that time Mrs. Bisi had managed to have her bath and aired her room, so the stench of smoke and sex was already beginning to leave the room. Mother, how are you? Io asked, leaning on the wall of his mother's room. I am fine, Mrs. Bisi said. Because their mother did not tell them what the problem was, Io left the room. Later, Mrs. Bisi told her daughter, I feel really dirty. There is so much I want to say, but my lips cannot make out the words because these words that I need to say are like a knife in the ears of whoever hears it. It will forever strip me naked. With this, Mrs. Bisi began to cry. Though Felicia did not know what her mother spoke of, she knew it must be something grave, and the fact that she couldn't help made her feel so helpless, so she too began to cry. Felicia eventually said, I will be your cloth mother. What? Mrs. Bisi was confused. When these words you need to say trip you naked, I will be a big cloth that will cover that nakedness. I will not judge you, mother. I will understand, and you don't have to tell the world. You can tell me, and I will be there for you. Mrs. Bisi began to cry again, so Bisi hugged her really tight, and they remained like that for a long time. That night, she knew Tunde would come again. She knew, but her heart had not even healed from the previous torture. It is still so broken. The physical had nothing close to what her spirit has gone through. She was shattered inside. Mrs. Bisi had thought of murdering her son many times, but she had no courage to do that. How does she take a life she suffered so much to bring to the world? How does she kill her own flesh and blood? She would have simply killed herself but was scared that Tunde would continue what he is doing with her daughter. Who knows how far this cultist can go? Aside from this, she feared her son would do great evil to other people too. That night when Tunde came again, Mrs. Bisi could hardly be swayed by her motherly love. She decided that what needs to be done will be done. The next day, Mrs. Bisi was able to get a hold of poison. She quickly poisoned a drink and placed it on a table as she waited for her son. Then Tunde came as always. How are you? I am fine, mother, he said as he began to unbuckle his belt. Oh, that reminds me, I kept a juice for you. Tunde was surprised. His mother handed him the glass filled with juice. All of a sudden, they began to laugh. He laughed so much that Mrs. Bisi felt a chill in her body. Tunde took the glass cup, went to the bathroom, and emptied the contents into the sink. Then he came back to the room to his mother. Tunde, do you think I poisoned your drink that you went to pour it away? He smiled. Your show of love to a son that has been wicked to you is alarming, and I don't trust it. Almost immediately, he pounced on his mother and began to rape her. After that day, Mrs. Bisi realized she had to do something fast. Her next step was to run away. She had not even tried to leave the house since the death of her husband, but she decided to leave forever that day. She took her box and put some of her possessions in it. She watched through the window for about an hour until she saw Tunde leaving the house, so she ran out, got into the car, and tried escaping the house, but the gateman refused to open the door. Open the gate. She called onto the gateman to open the door because he refused to when she honked. Ma, Ogre said I should not open the gate for you. Which ogre gave such instruction in my own house? Will you go and open this gate now? The gateman still did not move. I said, who told you that? Ogre Tunde. I just need to go to the store and go and open the gate. Mrs. Beasy was almost shouting now. But the gatekeeper still refused. Mrs. Beasy came out of the car and tried to open the gate, but she discovered that the gate was locked. Frustrated, Mrs. Beasy returned to the house, determined she would not endure another rape by her son that day. She took her phone and called her only daughter. She returned from her friend's house. "Felicia, the offer you made to offer me a cloth, is it still intact?" "The offer is always available, mother." With this, Mrs. Beasy told her daughter everything. She told her how her father was a ritualist and what she now has to face because of it. At the end of her story, Felicia was trembling so much that Mrs. Beasy had to hold her. Eventually she got a hold of herself. "I have no blame for you, mother. You married a man you didn't know, you didn't ask questions when you should have, but you are not that man. I will not shift blame. I know you've tried to kill Tunde, and I believe we can achieve that together." The mother and daughter decided how that night would go. As usual, Tunde came for his mother and began to pull his trousers. Mrs. Beasy was wrapped in a duvet and was facing the other side when he came. He climbed onto the bed, and immediately he pulled the duvet off his mother. Mrs. Beasy drove a knife into his chest. Before he could react, Felicia opened the closet that she had been hiding in and repeatedly stabbed him in the neck, causing Tunde to fall and die. When he died, Mrs. Beasy pulled him close and began to wail. "I am sorry, I failed you. I am so sorry, I failed you. I am sorry, Tunde, I love you so much, and I forgive you." Felicia fell to the ground. The noise brought Io running into the room, and he met the most horrible scene he had ever seen. His brother lying in a pool of his own blood. "What happened?" he asked, confused and frightened. Felicia narrated the ordeal to him. They decided they need to cover his death so the ritualist will not make them pay for what happened. They made a fire in the house and left Tunde's body in it. The house burnt down. Later, it was heard that Tunde was so drunk that he could not run when the house started burning, and the family only knew he was still trailing in when they had reached it and when the fire was too big for them to go back in. The family left Lagos state for another state and lived on the low. They made do with the little they now have, but with the joy that they are no longer part of the evil of the Brotherhood cult. Do you think Mrs. Beasy should have endured instead of killing Tunde, her own son, or do you think her action is justifiable because of what Tunde did to her? I will like to read your views about this story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories. You can also watch other interesting stories on our channel.